It is July 552 AD, and in the wilds of Etruria, Italy, a small party of horsemen is riding through the night with a hunting party at their backs. These hunters howl like wolves as they cut down the escapees' comrades in the fields and ditches behind, the screams punctuating the sultry night, along with the drum of hooves and the caught breath of terrified men clutching tight at their reins. At the party's head, a tall man leans forward in the saddle, his right arm held up and immobile as though he is winded. It is only when a cloud passes and they ride under the unfiltered moonlight that the blood leaking down his horse's flank glistens in an unending stream. The wounded man is Totila, king of the Ostrogoths and twice conqueror of Rome. His paltry number of remaining guards pray that they will reach safety with him by morning, so that they can dress his wounds and bring the legendary talisman back from the dead. But it is not to be. By the time that the party reaches the village of Capraia, a mere 7 miles from the battlefield at Tagine, on which disaster had befallen them a day earlier, Totila is dead. Not wishing to tarry so close to the vicinity where their enemies are embarking on a spree of murderous vengeance, Totila's attendants bury his body with unseemly haste, and then flee, pressing on to a place where Roman swords will not reach them. In the meantime, the forces of the Roman general Narses, the elderly court eunuch who has now bested the most virile and savage of warriors, are unaware of their nemesis's fate. It is only when an old Gothic woman shows them the shallow gravesite and they exhume the carcass from the dirt that they are convinced the nightmare of Totila's deprivations are over. And yet, there is still work needed before the commencement of reconstruction. Already, the remnants of Totila's Ostrogoths are coalescing around his general Teius, and Teius knows exactly what needs to be done if he is to have any hope of avoiding Totila's terrible fate. He brings his few thousand warriors to Ticinum over the Po River, where Totila stored a great cache of treasure. Suddenly, Narses' position is not nearly so strong as it might have appeared in the immediate aftermath of the triumph at Tagine. At a time when the greatest Roman field army in Italy numbers a little over 20,000 men, Teius' force of a few thousand is still a power to be reckoned with, and what is more, the Franks, who are no friends of the Romans, still occupy the north of the peninsula. Teius bets that he can use Totila's treasure to bring the Franks into alliance with him, thereby creating a new host with which to seize the great prize that is Italy. Narses, meanwhile, has his own objective. Leaving aside Teius and the threat of the Franks for the moment, he makes directly for the crown jewel that ranks above all others in the civilized world, the city of Rome itself. First, however, he must dispense with unnecessary burdens. The Lombards, the Germanic people who have made a name for themselves in their spoliation and rapine, are paid off and thanked for their service. Narses instructs his general Valerian to see the tribe back to the northern border and out of Italy, which he does, and then makes to absorb the city of Verona back into the Roman fold. Valerian is quickly warned off this action by the Franks, who claim that Verona falls within their sphere of influence, and he accordingly withdraws south once more. There was once a time where a Roman senator needed only to draw a line in the sand, even thousands of miles from the city, and entire empires would come to a halt. Now, Valerian's capitulation in this autumn of 552 is another reminder that that time of unsurpassed Roman power is long past. Instead, he takes up position on the Po at Narses' command, watching the far bank in the event that Teias makes his alliance and the Franks combine their forces with his own. Narses himself, meanwhile, moves from the battlefield of Tagini and into Tuscany, and there he takes Narni and Spoleto, as well as the traitorous garrison of Perusia. Narses then arrives before the skeletal remains of Rome and surveys the vista with melancholy. On the worn stone of the remaining walls, the Gothic garrison stares sullenly back at him. Behind them, the once majestic and awe-inspiring buildings are blackened and charred by fire, and the ceilings pulled and collapsed, leaving the great porticos and terraces exposed to the elements. At night, when lightning flashes across the approaching winter sky and cold rain falls, it is as though Narses and his men have entered the realms of a deathly middle place between Earth and the underworld. But in the daytime, superstitions and lamentations must be put to the side, and Narses assesses the task in front of him. With the Aurelian walls too wide to defend in their reduced numbers, the Goths holding the city have withdrawn to the mausoleum of Hadrian and built a shorter wall around it to link with the main city wall, and there constructed a fortified redoubt, likely incorporating the Tiber either as a barrier and/or water supply. Even still, Narses knows that the far greater part of the Ostrogothic strength lies dead at the bottom of the waters off Sicily, following the Roman naval victory off Ancona, as well as on the field at Tagini. He thus splits his forces outside the walls and begins what appears to the defenders to be a series of random attacks. First, the same archers who tore apart the cavalry of Tortilla just weeks earlier march up and loose volleys upon the walls, and then at another spot further down, John, the nephew of Vitellion, makes an attack with another force. Still more of the Roman barbarian Foederati storm a third point. While the Goths rush to defend from all three of these simultaneous offensives, Narses observes their actions for a time, and, satisfied that they have shown their hand, he orders a fourth force, this time under the general Dagisteus, to advance on the walls at an isolated point and attempt a breach. Dagisteus finds little to no resistance, and his men climb their ladders and enter the ancient and sacred precincts of the Holy City. Narses watches as the gates swing open and Rome is once more in the hands of the Caesars, the fifth time it has changed hands since the advent of Justinian's reign. In response, Teias has several hundred Roman children, taken hostage from noble families by Totila prior to the Battle of Tagini, put to death, as well as any Roman senator that he can locate within reach of his now murderous gangs. Narses is still not finished his task of mopping up the Ostrogothic remnants. He sends a force south to the city of Cumae, where it is said that Tortilla has lodged another great store of treasure, and puts it to siege. Still unable to lure the Franks into an alliance, Teias begins a march south to halt the city's capture. The loss of this treasury would condemn the Ostrogoths to little more than bandit status. Narses sends his general John to guard the western roads in Etruria and block any potential advance by Teias, while Valerian holds the Via Flaminia after capturing Petra Pertusa. Narses expects the Ostrogoth leader to take the most direct route to Cumae in order to relieve his comrades, but Teias knows that the Romans are expecting him. Betting that the Goths in Cumae can hold out, he takes a leaf out of Narcissus' book and veers to the Adriatic coast roads, moving down and around the Roman holding forces. His plan is audacious. Having stayed in touch with the remaining ships of the Gothic fleet, he crosses the peninsula by way of Beneventum and orders the ships to await him at Neapolis. Rather than fight his way through the Roman army and the Cumae siege, he will have the fleet bring him and his force into the city, where they will secure the treasure and either fight it out with Narses, or else withdraw once more by sea to safety. But as his army winds its way along the Campanian trails in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, the looming volcano spitting fire and black smoke up to the heavens, they come into sight of the Drakon River, and there awaits them a formidable sight. Informed of the Ostrogoths' plans, Narses has moved swiftly and occupied the far bank of the river, blocking Teius' route to link up with his ships. But the peculiar nature of the waterway also delays any possibility the two armies might have of provoking an engagement with the other. Although the Drakon is quite narrow, its banks are particularly steep, and a fording under fire and assault is quite impossible. Teius' forces seize the bridge over the river, and they are able to supply their ranks from the Gothic fleet. But apart from providing these provisions, the ships are of no other assistance. Teius has no place to embark his thousands of men, while Narses can theoretically launch an attack as the Ostrogoth host is in redeployment. Stalemate is the result. Both sides dispatch archers to the banks with limited results, each army driving the other back out of range or under cover, but they are unable to make the breakthrough over to the other's lines. This state of action continues for some weeks, stretching eventually into 2 months, with both commanders intent on holding their position and giving no quarter to the enemy. Teius has the idea to use the shielding provided by his archers to construct siege towers on the bridge, thus giving him an extra edge in regard to range. But the response from Narses is to redouble his own efforts and then build his own siege towers in response. With these fastening the Ostrogoths in place, the situation on land settles once more, but worse is to come for Teius. The Roman fleet arrives off the coast and hovers over the relatively fragile Ostrogothic flotilla. From the sea, the Gothic admiral looks at his available options and decides on the most pragmatic option. He surrenders to the Empire, and with that action, Teius and the Ostrogoths in the field are stripped of supplies. Desperation born of the long, fruitless fighting on the side of the volcanic river sets in, and Teius attempts to lead a withdrawal. This takes them up a slope that Procopius tells us is called the Milk Mountain, or Mons Lactorius in Latin, but the choice of following its inhospitable and hostile ground to deter the Romans from pursuit only results in the Ostrogoths being further isolated from resupply. Teius has made a fateful error, and the situation is stark: death by starvation or battle. The Roman army is tracking and stalking the Goths, and they arrive at the foot of the mountain, searching for trails and passageways, sealing the heights from any possible escape. Before they can settle into an organized siege position, however, the Gothic army lurches forward like a cornered scorpion, and its thousands of warriors scream down the hill, spear and sword in hand. Electing to do battle without horses, Teius' men have decided that it is better to fight for their life rather than watch it ebb away. And their attack is mad, desperate, frenzied. The Romans, who are still marking out their camp and formations, are taken by surprise when the tumult of Goths floods over their pickets and forward lines and rushes directly into their midst. But the Romans and their own barbarian allies stand their ground, scorning the notion that they will be bested by a rabble of inferior numbers. They rush forward with their own sharpened lances and stones, arrows flying overhead from both sides where men carry bows. The pitch of battle is deliriously vicious, quarter neither asked nor given. Here a man has his stomach opened by the slash of a blade. There another falls to the ground by a thrown javelin. Position and deployment are impossible. The churned up and lunar nature of the mountainside makes it so. They fight as pressed masses, packs of animals ripping and tearing each other asunder until one is inevitably destroyed. Teias knows that he must lead from the front to inspire his men, and this he does, but he is quickly identified by the Romans. Narses' men target him, making the Goths fight all the harder for their leader. His shield fills with thrown spears as he swaps it for another with his guard. Teias fights on, killing Romans left and right, but his second shield fills with yet more thrown lances, and he swaps it once more. Eventually, however, his moment of vulnerability comes, and one of the Romans times his throw just at the second that Teias exchanges yet another of the shields, and leaves his chest unguarded. The brave leader is struck, and dies almost immediately. Yet the Goths fight on, for they know that the end of their people is close at hand. With only a third of the day past, they careen and lunge at the Roman lines, and Narses' forces respond with their own counterattacks and the display of Teias' head on a Roman javelin. Eventually, as night nears and a likely final massacre becomes an ever closer possibility, the remaining Ostrogoths sue for peace. Their surrender rests on the promise to not only withdraw from the field and relinquish all claim to Italy and imperial lands, but to leave the peninsula and never return to it again. Thus, the Confederation of the Ostrogoths, which had formed in the wake of Attila's defeat a century before and come to rule Rome itself for decades, is brought to an end, sputtering from the pages of history in a hard-fought and bloody last stand, the pride of its warriors intact, while the glory of Rome is made manifest. For Narses, there is negotiation to facilitate the delayed capture of Cumae, and then the greater work of rebuilding Italy and Rome itself. It is past the time that any real restoration of Rome's grandeur is possible. The city has long been in decline, but 18 years of war with the Goths has rendered it little more than a provincial outpost, in the same state that Carthage long served in the centuries following its own fall. So it will be with Rome, and thus ever to the fortunes of the great and glorious. There is no respite for the army of the Emperor Justinian, however. For almost the same moment that Teias' head is tossed aside and thrown to the dogs, disquieting news arrives from the realms of the Franks to the north. War will rage on, after all. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my videos for as little as $1. You can also show your support by liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel as a sacrifice to the algorithm. As always, I'll see you in the next one.